Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Welcome into 2021, everybody. It is Monday, January 4th. We are coming back to you guys live here on a daily basis now that we have gotten through the holidays. Hopefully everybody out there had a fantastic Christmas, a great Hanukkah, a tremendous Kwanzaa, and of course, a happy New Year. While we continued to stay safe and social distance, and hopefully there weren't too many get-togethers out there, and you guys are doing what you can to hopefully get us out of this as soon as we possibly can here. But we've turned the calendar. It is now 2021, but unfortunately, here at the top of today's episode, I do have to discuss what has been a bit of a pattern in 2020, and that is the death of another Hall of Fame baseball player. So, Phil Niekro passed away within the past week here. He was 81 years old. He was going through a battle with cancer. So unfortunately, I believe that makes him the 7th Hall of Fame guy to pass away in 2020, which according to the Hall of Fame is a record for a calendar year. So it could have tied a record or broken a record depending on, certain stipulations based on what I was reading. But either way, it's certainly a shame that 2020, on top of COVID and all of that good stuff, decided to take 7 Hall of Fame baseball guys away from us. But Phil Niekro, better known as Knucksy, of course, was the best knuckleball pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball. I mean, just looking at his stats here, he has such a fascinating career and fascinating story. On the whole, of course, Hall of Fame. He was a 5-time All-Star. He was also a 5-time Gold Glove Award winner. He won an ERA title in 1967. So this guy threw for over the course of, 24 years in the big leagues. And again, the more and more I research kind of these gentlemen who played in the 70s, 60s, 80s, that time frame who have since passed, just some of these numbers that they put up just don't even translate into today's game. Because, going through some of his statistics and some of his accomplishments here, over the course of those 24 years, he has 318 wins to 274 losses. So 318 and 274 is the career record for Knucksy there. He also has over 5,400 innings pitched in his career. And the gentleman, for games started, is actually 4th on the all-time list. So he's appeared in a grand total of 864 games, making a total of 716 starts. And that is just a fascinating number, 716 starts. Going through the list here, there is a streak from 1968 all the way through, let's scroll down here, 1987, where there is 1 year in between there, and it was the strike-shortened season of 1981, where he only made 22 starts. So every other year from 68 to 87, he made at least 30 starts, and there was a 3-year run in 1977, 78, and 79 where he made over 40 starts 3 years in a row. And, for reference to kind of today's game, if you make 35 starts, you have made every one of your starts for the entire season, without missing any of them due to injury or sickness or whatever the heck it is. So to basically average about 37 starts over the course of 20 years just, should resonate with you guys out there in regards to how reliable Phil Niekro was. But, of course, the reliability comes from throwing the knuckleball because it doesn't put a lot of stress on your arm. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on your arm as well. And, Phil Niekro, one of his quotes here, talking about the knuckleball himself, he said, quote, "Nobody has ever given me a good, definite explanation as to why the ball does what it does. I've heard all about the aerodynamic stuff, the Reynolds number, which states that a sphere with a 3-inch diameter makes its maximum movement between 50 and 75 miles an hour. I've had people film it at 28,000 frames per second, and I've had a guy do his college thesis on my knuckleball, but nobody has made me understand it." And Phil was taught the knuckleball by his dad when he grew up in the 40s and 50s. His dad was a coal miner as well as a semi-pro player who taught Phil growing up how to throw it and ultimately, what would be the best pitch or best idea of his lifetime to launch Phil Niekro's career because it took him a while to get to the big leagues as well. And, the guy's got, 700 and some starts? Well, he was in the minor leagues for about 10 years as well before he broke through for good. When he broke through in 1967, he had 20 starts. He led the league in ERA at 1.87. That was really the first time that anybody gave him a chance because up until that point, the problem was that nobody could catch the knuckleball. People would steal bases on him. There were constantly pass balls. Nobody could, really understand how to catch the knuckleball. And of course, that led to him having trouble breaking through and breaking into the major leagues. But again, once he did, he stuck around for 24 years, and 21 of those years came with the Atlanta Braves. He won 268 games for the Braves, threw over 4,600 innings for them as well. But looking into some of the rankings when it comes to the statistics and, ultimately where he would lie when it comes to the best of the best, he is one of only 10 pitchers to accomplish both 300 wins as well as 3,000 strikeouts. 6 of them came from what they call that 70s group, a bunch of those guys back in the 70s who were wheeling and dealing. But he's 11th in Baseball Reference version of WAR, or wins above replacement. He's 5th in losses. Now, of course, not all of these statistics or standings will be of the positive nature. When you're throwing for 24 innings, you're going to lose some games, give up some hits, and give up some home runs because he's 5th in losses. He is, 4th in innings, 4th in hits allowed. He's allowed over 5,000 hits in 5,400 innings. He is 4th in home runs allowed. He's allowed 483. He's 3rd in walks and 2nd in earned runs allowed with 2,012. And this is only behind Cy Young. So the guys who pitch forever and the guys who play as long as they do, of course, they're going to be, on the wrong end of some career statistics categories. But he has, for his career, Phil is also 5th in most career starts. The first 4 that are above him, you guys are going to know these names. You have Cy Young, Nolan Ryan, Don Sutton, and Greg Maddux as the top 4 for career starts. But those 4 guys have all pitched in a World Series. So Phil Niekro has the most starts out of anyone to never pitch in a World Series. So he is basically the guy who was the best of the best to never be able to make it to the Fall Classic and the big-time show there at the end of October. But certainly, guys discussing the knuckleball, there are some quotes here from some players he played with or against. Bobby Mercer once said that trying to hit against Phil Niekro is like trying to eat Jell-O with chopsticks. Sometimes you get a piece, but most of the time you end up hungry. Rick Monday, outfielder Rick Monday told Sports Illustrated way back when, it actually giggles at you as it goes by. And then Pete Rose, of course, the hits king in Major League Baseball, he was quoted as saying, "I work for 3 weeks trying to get my swing down pat, and Phil messes it up in one night. Trying to hit that thing is a miserable way to make a living." So everybody out there respected Phil, respected the knuckleball. Of course, like I said, they also respected what it took for him to get to the big leagues, because in the minor leagues, he had a 7.46 ERA in 10 appearances at one time. He wasn't going to be brought back, but scouts vouched for him, decided to give him another shot. He was thinking about throwing other pitches just besides the knuckleball, but of course, none of that, all came to pass, and he stuck strictly with the knuckleball. But things really clicked for Phil Niekro in 1967 when he was actually aligned with a new catcher, Bob Uecker. You guys know Uecker, the voice of the Milwaukee Brewers, of course, now, Major League, the movie. Everybody knows Hall of Fame announcer Bob Uecker. So he was acquired from the Phillies to the Braves, and Uecker was willing to catch Phil Niekro's knuckleball on a daily basis, right? And, Uecker, honestly, you got to look up some of his quotes when he's talking about the knuckleball, because they are absolutely hysterical. A couple of them are: the easiest way to catch a knuckleball is to wait until it stops rolling and then pick it up and throw it back. He also talked about how over the next couple of years he met a lot of great and interesting people, because he was always running back to the backstop, and important people tend to sit in the first row. So he got to know a lot of celebrities and fans very close, because he was running back there to pick up the ball. But honestly, in regards to the ability to catch a knuckleball, one of the fascinating statistics is that in what year was it? 67. Phil Niekro set the ERA record, or had the ERA record for the year. But Bob Uecker also set the modern National League record with 27 pass balls. So Niekro led the league in ERA, and Uecker led the league in pass balls, which certainly tend to not add up, because you're thinking if you get a guy on, throw a couple pass balls, he's at second or third, you hit yourself a sac fly, get him over, get him in, and you're good to go. You're getting yourself a run. So, Niekro, oh man, I just couldn't imagine throwing that knuckleball and not even knowing where it goes as the pitcher, right? You really have no idea which way things are going to go. So it certainly is just fascinating to, watch a game with a knuckleball pitcher. Of course, Niekro was before my time. The biggest knuckleball guys in my life are Tim Wakefield of the Boston Red Sox, and then most recently R.A. Dickey, who's floated around. He had time with the Blue Jays, the Mets, so those two kind of in my lifetime were the biggest ones, with, of course, Wakefield having the biggest name. But Phil Niekro never won a Cy Young Award. He finished second in 1969 when he went 23-13 with a 2.56 ERA. He finished third in 1974, where he went 20-13 with a 2.38 ERA. And one of the last amazing accomplishments from Niekro that I'm not sure, I'm pretty confident will never be matched again, just based on the way pitching and arms and things like that work, is Niekro is the only gentleman to win 20 games and lose 20 games in the same season. It was 1979 with the Atlanta Braves. He was 40 years old. He went 21-20 with a 3.39 ERA in 44 starts. He also had 23 complete games that year. I mean, think about that. There are times in 2020 where guys are making 23 starts during a season, and Niekro had 23 complete games. Now, he finished 6th that year in the Cy Young, 20th in the MVP voting, and he did win a Gold Glove in 1979. So, of course, it was a successful season for him. But, man, losing 20 games and winning 20 games, you would literally need a decision in every one of your starts. And then nowadays with baseball, 5 guys in the rotation, 160-some games. Like I said, you're starting 35 games tops. So it's certainly not going to be a viable experience or viable record for anybody to beat here shortly. But wrapping things up here, Phil Niekro and his brother Joe are actually the largest, or have the most wins for a brotherly combination in Major League Baseball. Combined between Phil and Joe, they have 539 victories, which is 10 more than Gaylord and Jim Perry amassed as a brotherhood. So the Niekro brothers, 539 wins. Those are the top amount for family when it comes to Major League Baseball and moving forward. But just a sad thing to hear, Phil Niekro passing away. Like I mentioned, the 7th guy in 2020 from the Hall of Fame. It's just super unfortunate. But looking at his hitting here, wrapping things up, he was an okay hitter. I mean, he had a career batting average of 169, but he also had 7 career home runs, highlighted by 1968 when he had a career-high 2 home runs for him there. His career high in RBIs, it looks like, was 12. That was done in 79 as well as 76. And his career high in average, did he ever hit 200? Yes, he hit 225 in 1978 when he was an all-star. So, of course, you never think of pitchers and batting and whatnot, but I just wanted to kind of bring that up and touch base here as we wrap things up. So, condolences out to the Neikro family. Of course, everybody who played with him or, was involved with him, because Phil was still involved with the Braves organization, doing a lot of charity, doing a lot of appearances, things along those lines. So, an unfortunate loss for the entire baseball community, as the best knuckleball pitcher in the history of baseball, Phil Knucksy Niekro, passes away. But amazing and talented career, 300 wins, 3,000 strikeouts, all those records, just fascinating. But hopefully this is the last time or the last time for a while that I have to talk to you guys about this, because I do love and enjoy diving into their careers, looking at some of these stats, old school baseball, just fascinating, 44 starts in a year. But of course, I don't like doing it because of somebody passing away, and Phil at the age of 81 with a battle of cancer. Rest in peace out there. So that'll do it for the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll step aside right now for a word from one of our sponsors as well as one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we got to talk San Diego Padres. I mean, a lot has happened since I talked to you guys last. So let's dive into some of those trades and what it may mean for the rest of the National League here in 2021.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you haven't done so yet, do me a favor. Head to social media. Check us out. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all across the board. Both the GSMC Baseball Podcast as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. The Baseball Podcast, myself, along with the other hosts of the show here, we'll keep you guys up to date with everything going on Major League Baseball. And the Podcast Network will keep you up to date across everything, whether it's politics, news, sports, whatever it is. You guys can stay up to date with all the greatest information when you head to social media. But here in segments 2 and 3, we're going to take a look at the San Diego Padres because, again, over the course of the past week, they've made a couple of deals, trading for Blake Snell and then Yu Darvish to add to their starting rotation. But we're going to break these down, kind of look at them one by one, discuss the trades, ultimately what I give the grades for each unit, and if I think ultimately they were good decisions there by both teams. But it started out with Blake Snell. Last Sunday, there were rumors of him being traded to the Padres, and then the deal was finalized this past Tuesday. So the Padres decided to make a move for the rotation due to Clevinger being out in 2021. They wanted to add a top-end piece to the likes of Chris Paddock, Zach Davies, Mackenzie Gore, who's a prospect as well, that the Padres are still very high on and did not have to give up in either of these deals. But with Clevinger missing all of 2021 due to Tommy John surgery, the Padres, if they were looking to compete and really make a move this year, certainly needed help on that aspect of things, because last year in the playoffs, they were able to sneak by the Cardinals in the first round with a couple of their guys dealing with arm injuries before ultimately being swept by the LA Dodgers in the postseason. And, of course, LA, they're not losing a ton this offseason. They may lose Turner. Kiki Hernandez has moved on. But the big names, the big guys, the big-time players are all going to be back for the Dodgers, which certainly makes them the favorite to repeat in the National League and win the World Series. But across the National League, you find yourself looking at, you got the Dodgers and then the Braves in the National League East, who have won that division a couple of years in a row now and made a couple of quick moves during the offseason in regards to starting pitching and, filling in some bats and things like that. So the Padres sitting there saying, hey, the Braves have gotten better. The Dodgers are still extremely good. So we're going to have to find ourselves making some moves here if we really feel that we have a shot to contend in 2021. So they make a move for Blake Snell. It was a 5-person trade. Blake Snell going to San Diego. The Rays in return receive right-handed pitcher Luis Patino, right-handed pitcher Cole Wilcox, catcher Blake Hunt, and catcher Francisco Mejia. So we'll get into those guys individually, kind of what they bring, what Tampa Bay's getting back. But on the surface level, like I mentioned, from San Diego's point of view, it certainly gives them an upgrade to the rotation and, has them feeling a lot better about the top end of that rotation. But from the Rays side of things, they continue to get out of large contracts with all-star caliber players. They've done this a couple of different years now. I mean, recently, a couple years back, it was Corey Dickerson and then Tommy Pham, and now Blake Snell being moved while they are still, quote-unquote, in their prime. But Tampa Bay loves to sling those guys for prospects and just continue to churn over cheap, very good talent. And, it's unfortunate as a baseball fan because obviously, with no salary cap, there isn't any kind of number that everybody must get to. It is individualized from team to team. But Snell has 3 years and $30 million remaining on his deal here. And for a top-end guy in the rotation, that is an absolute bargain. I mean, you're looking at $20, $25, $30 million a year for the likes of guys who would be in Blake Snell's category. And he signed this deal a couple of years back. It was a 5-year deal. He's got 3 of them left. But, Tampa Bay is kind of jumping at the opportunity here to restock a couple of pitching prospects. Because when you start to dive into Blake Snell, there is some good and there is some bad. Because looking at his career, he's thrown for now 5 seasons at the big league level. His first 2 were so-so. 6-8, 3.54 ERA. He was then 5-7 with a 4.04 ERA. In 2018, that's when his breakout took place. He went 21-5 for the Rays. He made the All-Star game. He won the Cy Young Award that year, as well as finishing 9th in the American League MVP voting. 21-5, 1.89 ERA, and 180 innings. Certainly a fantastic year for Blake Snell and really slingshotted him kind of up to that upper tier of starting pitchers. And then you fast forward to 2019 and 2020. You have him going 6-8 with a 4.29 ERA. He did miss some time with some shoulder tightness and stiffness. And then here in 2020, in a condensed season, of course, he made 11 starts, went 4-2 with a 3.24 ERA. So out of 5 years, 4 of them, he's had at least a 3.24 ERA. And then in his one excellent year, 21-5, a 1.89 ERA. So Tampa Bay looking at this, they may see, hey, this guy is kind of, in between there, right? He's got a career 42-30 record, 3.24 ERA as well. Now, some of his underlying metrics over the past 2 years have certainly improved. His strikeout rate and his walk rate has exploded. He stopped walking people. He's found the zone a lot more because, early in his career, he walked 51, 59, 64 guys. But the last 2 years, he was at 40-18. And this past year with a 63-18 strikeout to walk ratio, almost being at that 4-1 level, certainly an uptick there that the Padres hope continues. But the Padres, they're getting a guy in Blake Snell who, you know what you're getting. So there's a difference between Yu Darvish and Blake Snell. And when you look at some of the graphs and breakdowns that are available out there on Baseball Savant and MLB.com and things like that, well, Blake Snell has a very discreet style. He throws high fastballs, a high four-seam fastball, what they call, quote-unquote, rising four-seam fastballs at the top of the zone, because if you guys haven't watched the documentary yet, Fastball on Netflix, I believe it's still available on Netflix. It was at one time. I'm sure you could find it out there somewhere. But it basically shows you that when the ball is on its way to home plate, it's physically impossible for the eye, the human eye, to see the ball in its entirety on the way to the plate. So what hitters typically do is out of the hand, you read spin, so you're able to determine fastball, curveball, whatever pitch it is, and thus, based on the trajectory out of the hand, your brain, due to muscle habits and rep after rep after rep, is able to say, okay, a fastball coming at this plane in this angle should end up at this part of the zone, which is where you ultimately take your swing. And this is where spin rate has recently become a big thing in Major League Baseball, because the faster a ball spins, the less that gravity is able to take hold of that pitch and bring it down to where the hitter believes it will be. So Snell lives at the top of the zone when it comes to four-seam fastballs, because his spin rate is high enough that typically guys will swing underneath of this type of location, thinking that the ball is going to fall a bit more than it does on the way to home plate. And a couple of other guys in 2020 who used very similar style of attacks to hitters, Shane Bieber, Lucas Giolito, both had a ton of success with the high fastball and then the curveball / slider down and out of the zone to get hitters to chase. Because starting pitchers with the highest percentage of breaking balls thrown out of the zone in 2020, both curveballs and sliders, Blake Snell was number 1 at 78.7. Number 2 and number 3 were Shane Bieber at 74 and Lance Lynn at 73.8. Well, both of those other guys had very successful 2020s as well. Lance Lynn, of course, since being traded to the White Sox. Shane Bieber, Cy Young winner, could have been MVP, that whole type of conversation. So Snell is very much involved with one of these particular styles of attack. And, he goes high fastball, and then if you're facing, think a, left-handed hitter, just for conversational purposes, down and in to a left-handed hitter, and strictly down is the slider curveball combination, and then down and away to a lefty or into a right-handed hitter is the quadrant where he throws his changeup. So, he's very distinct when it comes to top of the zone fastballs, lower part of the zone off-speed pitches, and this has certainly made him very successful during his time there in Tampa Bay, because, the guy gets a ton of swing and misses, right? He struck out 414 batters since 2018, 167 on the fastball, 179 on the curveball, and then 68 on the slider. So, three-pitch pitcher, doesn't exactly use the changeup as much as some of his counterparts there when it comes to the starting rotation, but the three-pitch arsenal of fastball, curveball, slider has been very effective for Snell so far. But transitioning now, looking at what kind of Tampa Bay is getting back here. Of course, they get 4 prospects, and they are very highly regarded when it comes to the San Diego prospect list. Now, the top prospect you're getting back is Luis Patino. He is the Padres' number 3 overall prospect, and according to Major League Baseball, he is number 23 overall across all of the major leagues. So he's a 21-year-old right-hander. Projections have him as kind of a number 2 style of starter, very similar to where Blake Snell is at the top of the rotation. He had a breakout campaign in 2019 in the minor leagues where he went from high A to double A, posted a 2.57 ERA with 123 strikeouts over 94 innings. His fastball touches 99. He's got a sharp slider, and if he could develop a changeup to offset left-handed hitting, he could be a three-pitch guy that finds success at the major league level. The next guy they got was Cole Wilcox. Wilcox was the number 7 rated prospects for the Padres. He was taken in the 3rd round of this past year's draft, so he has not made his professional debut yet, but the Padres thought highly enough of them that they gave him a $3 million signing bonus to walk away from his senior year at the University of Georgia. So he may have the best pure stuff in the 2020 class, but certainly needs to work on mechanics consistently and finding the zone and being effective in the zone, because there is control and then there is command. And this guy has control, so he's in the zone, but it's just the command aspect that will continue to ultimately lead to his development at the big league level. So they get 2 arms back, the Rays do, those 2 gentlemen, both right-handed pitchers, and then they also go with 2 guys behind the dish. And these guys are kind of opposites, which is fascinating to see in a trade like this, that you take 2 catchers. They basically said, hey, one or the other, and I feel like Tampa Bay said, give me both of them. We'll figure out later, ultimately, what's going to take place. So Francisco Mejia is the first gentleman. He was the 15th rated prospect for the Padres at the time of the trade. He came over to the Padres in the 2018 trade for Brad Hand. He's 25 years old. He hit .229 in 116 games. And, honestly, his biggest flaw is on the defensive end, on the receiving side of things. Now, there was an uptick for the 2020 season during his time behind the plate, but, was that a small sample size? Is it a trend? Where are we headed in only 60 games here? And Mejia, he's a smaller gentleman, so this is where I say they're kind of on the opposite sides of the spectrum, because he finds himself, I think he's 5'8", like 180 pounds. And then the other guy they got behind the dish was Blake Hunt, who is on the opposite side of things. He's a bigger gentleman, a little more power when it comes to Hunt and his prospects. Hunt is 22 years old. He's the Padres' number 14 rated prospect. He's got a big arm, good pop time, still needs to improve offensively with some contact. But if he develops power at the plate, like I said, 6'3", 215, he could find himself being a worthy addition to the Rays there. But Tampa Bay gives up Blake Snell, and then in return, they get the number 3, number 7, number 14, and number 15 rated prospects from the Padres. So they get 4 out of their top 15 prospects when it comes to the deal for Blake Snell. So, where do I feel ultimately this trade lands? In regards to the Padres, I love the deal. I like Blake Snell. I know he only averages about 5 innings per start over the past 2 years, so it'll be fascinating to see if San Diego kind of continues on that trend line and only uses his in a limited fashion, or if they decide to kind of let him go and let him ride for extended starts. But San Diego, I'll give it A-, just because I like Blake Snell. Of course, 4 guys is a lot to give up for just 1. But really, when you look at it, you're giving up a number 3 prospect, a kid who you just drafted, so you're not exactly sure how he's going to pan out, and then a couple of guys behind the dish that are middle-tier prospects for you, and, based on looking at their prospect pool, they're going to have somebody else back there and not miss those guys a ton. So I give the Padres an A-. I'll give the Rays a B. I'll call it B- when it comes to that. I like Patino. I like Wilcox. Both of those guys could find themselves in the Rays rotation here sooner than later, but Mejia and Hunt are kind of just throw-ins where I think Tampa Bay is hopefully looking to hit on just one of those guys. But fascinating moves made by the Padres. Like I said, this was one of 2 deals made by them over the past week. So we'll step aside here now. We'll pause for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll talk about the Yu Darvish trade and then ultimately how San Diego lines up to compete with the likes of the Dodgers and the Braves in 2021. So I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks for listening, everybody, once again. Stick around for just a moment. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Monday, January 4th. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you guys haven't checked out any other shows within the GSMC Podcast Network and you're into podcasts, I don't know what you're waiting for. I mean, hit that little search icon wherever you're listening to this. Type in the letters GSMC. You'll find yourself with a politics podcast, news, books, movies, or if you're a sports guy like myself, basketball has since returned, so the NBA podcast is hopping. The NFL is heading to the playoffs here after this past weekend, so you're going to want to check those out. Fantasy football has closed up, but obviously with the playoffs happening, that'll be a great show, and you got hockey right around the corner. So check out GSMC. There's upwards of 20, 30 different podcasts within the network, so whichever title or subject you're looking for, there's a podcast for you. But jumping in now to segment number 3, continuing our conversation around the San Diego Padres. One day after completing the trade for Blake Snell, the Padres struck again. They made a trade with the Chicago Cubs for Yu Darvish, as well as his personal catcher, Victor Caratini. So those two guys going from Chicago out to San Diego. San Diego in return sending 5 gentlemen back to the Cubs. Zach Davies, Owen Casey, Ismael Mena, Reginald Preciado, and Yeson Santana. Now, we're going to break down this trade kind of similar we did to Blake Snell. Of course, Yu Darvish is on his 9th year in Major League Baseball here. He spent 4.5 years with Texas, half a season with the Dodgers, and then the last 3 in Chicago, where he signed a 6-year, $126 million deal. So he has 3 years left on that deal, just about $60 million remaining. And the $60 million is a big component because the Chicago Cubs only ate, or what we call paid, to the Padres, $3 million of that $60 million. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because if the team trading the individual is willing to pay more of his salary, typically they get a better prospect pool back in return. And, you know, the Cubs only willing to give $3 million, I think had a lot to do with the return haul that they received from the Padres. Because the Padres now, of course, we talked about Snell. Clevinger will miss 2021, but he will be back in 2022, along with Snell and Darvish. You also have Dinelson Lamet, Mackenzie Gore in the rotation. Zach Davies was in the rotation, but he, of course, is going back to Chicago as really the only major league level talent that they're receiving here, because Darvish, for the past 18 months, has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, if you look at 2019 with the Cubs, his numbers overall are not that great, but if you dive a bit deeper and kind of look at his second half and then compound that with, you know, the 60-game season we had here, so basically over a course of a full season, he's given up 2 runs or less. I believe it's 17 out of 24 of his last starts. So the guy has been electric. I mean, he finished second in the Cy Young voting this year, 4th in the MVP, or 14th in the MVP race for the National League. But he attributes his success and his kind of uptick or return to being Yu Darvish, to the Cubs allowing him to be himself and work a bit slower, because a lot of the complaints with Yu Darvish comes from the rest of his teammates, guys behind him. He works so slow. It's known as the human rain delay. when it comes to somebody who takes forever, throws a ton of pitches, and a lot of walks, a lot of strikeouts. It is just a long, grueling baseball game for people pitching behind that. But if the results are 8-3 with a 2.01 ERA, you're going to take that 3.5, 4-hour game every fifth day when Darvish takes the hill. Because Darvish, opposite of Blake Snell, doesn't really have much of a pattern when it comes to his sabermetrics. He throws, I believe, if you ask him, I think he said, 10 pitches? 10 different types of pitches that he throws, which is just, fascinating to think about. But you pull up his baseball savant chart, and there are different colored dots all over the place. Like Snell was fastball up, curveball, change up in the bottom quadrants. Darvish is 6 different colored dots, 7 different colored dots all over the place. So I think that is also a benefit to the Padres because you'll have Snell from the left side and follow that up with Darvish from the right side, and then you get Clevinger potentially in 2022 to come back, who is kind of a mix of both. He's a little bit more textbook than Darvish, but from the right side, bit of a funky windup, changes timing, things like that. So I think the top of the rotation of Darvish, Snell, and then in this next year, Dinelson, Lamet, they are actually projected to have the second best trio in all of baseball when it comes to projected WAR. They are just right below Strasburg, Corbin, and Scherzer for the Washington Nationals now. So the top 3 guys out there in San Diego, even with Lamet, next year you add in Clevinger and then sprinkle in Mackenzie Gore, and you're going to find yourself a heck of a rotation out there in San Diego. So they add another top-end quality starter and certainly cement themselves as a top 3 team, in my opinion, like I said, along with the Braves and Dodgers in the National League as teams that could certainly win the league and even the World Series after that. But let's talk a little bit about the Cubbies here. Let's get into a discussion about what the heck Chicago is doing. So, of course, everybody knows Theo Epstein stepped down. Jed Hoyer, took over and has since started a bit of a rebuild or a bit of a payroll cleanse. They non-tendered Kyle Schwarber, so he is going to move on this offseason. Now, Darvish, and basically the word on the street is that anybody in a Cubs uniform is up for grabs. They're available. You can call. They're not just going to give them away, of course. That's what everybody says. But maybe they did here in the Darvish trade. We'll get to that. But they're listening on everybody. Wilson Contreras, catching position behind the dish. He has since been kind of labeled the next guy who has had the most traction and could potentially go. So they are continuing to just kind of pilfer through this roster. They also have Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, Chris Bryant are all on their last year of arbitration and last year of team control for this next year. So they would have to sign all of those guys if they want to bring them back. So it is the beginning of a turnover in Chicago, and it was interesting reading some quotes from Hoyer out of Chicago talking about the rebuild and how teams like the Giants, Phillies, and Tigers, he specifically mentioned as, were either did not do it or were unwilling to kind of rebuild before it may have been time. And honestly, I think there's some truth to that because, I was thinking about the Phillies and what they went through, kind of the tail end of Utley, Rollins, and Howard, and that whole core inside of things, how they continued to kind of run it back when, really they should have moved on, tried to get prospects. Howard retired. They lost Utley to free agency. Rollins retired. So they didn't get anything for any of these guys. And this is where Chicago's looking at that going, hey, even if, we don't get top-end prospects, we got to get something because we just can't let all of these guys walk in a year, and then we don't have any big league talent, and we don't have any minor league level talent behind it to, come and fill in for those types of guys. So the Cubs, they continue to make a bit of a tiered move here. The one major league level talent that they got back was Zach Davies. He was in the rotation for the Padres. You guys heard me mention him. He went 7-4 with a 2.73 ERA during his 1 year in San Diego last year. He spent the 5 years before that with the Milwaukee Brewers. 2017 went 17-9 for the Brewers over 33 starts. So the guy, he's a solid big league pitcher, right? He doesn't throw overly hard. He pitches to contact. He works fast, and people like playing behind him. But he is also a free agent after the 2021 season. So if you look at Zach Davies, best case scenario for the Cubbies would be that he pitches extremely well in the first half of 2021, and then they are able to move him in July or August for potentially even more prospects. So when you look back at this Yu Darvish deal 3-4 years from now, this prospect list of 5 names, including Davies, could grow to potentially 6 or 7 as they try to reset, the bottom level of their minor league system. Because when you look at the guys they got back, the casual baseball fan is not going to recognize any of the 4 prospects. They've only had 1 prospect out of the 4 actually take at-bats in a professional game. They got a ton of lottery tickets in this trade. And if you're the Cubbies and you're a Cubs fan, that's not exactly what you want to hear, or that's not exactly the route you had anticipated going for the 2021 season. The NL Central is kind of down. There's a lot of trade rumors in the NL Central. The Cardinals, Wainwright, Molina, are they moving on? In Milwaukee, you got Hader who could be traded. And it seems to be that the Central could be there to be competitive for the Cubbies once again. But, of course, as Hoyer said, one eye on the present, one eye on the future. You have to look at a deal like this and hope that, at least one out of these 4 guys that you got back ultimately pans out. Because you have Davies, you're ultimately going to flip him for some prospects if things go well. But the other 4 gentlemen, Owen Casey, who is an outfielder out of Canada, he was a 2020 second-round pick for the Padres. And, of course, due to the pandemic and the virus, there were no minor leagues this past year, so he did not get any professional at-bats, or he was, unable to kind of get a feel, and even scouts, weren't able to determine ultimately how his game will transition or progress through an uptick in competition. But, a big kid, second-round draft picked out of, Canada, 45th overall, I believe it was. Somebody usually doesn't skyrocket out of high school to the top level of your prospect list, but certainly a second-round pick, a young kid. He's going to take years to develop, but he has all the tools there to be successful in the outfield for the Cubs. Now, he doesn't look like a center fielder, kind of bigger, a little less fleet of foot, but putting him out there in right field or even potentially left field should be okay for Owen Casey. So I look for him to be a handful of years away. Like I said, for the Cubs, you may see guys in 2025 who are finally making contributions that you ultimately got from the Yu Darvish trade. Because these next 2 guys, very fascinating prospects. You have Ishmael Mena, who is an outfielder. He was signed in 2019 for $2 million at the age of 16. So this guy now, 2 years later, a year later, 17, 18 years old, once again, did not play in the minor league level last year at all for the Padres, does not have a professional at-bat to his name, coming over from the Dominican Republic for $2 million. But, that's a lot of money for those kids. And a lot of these international prospects have started to pan out. You got Vlad Jr., Jose Abreu, all these guys, Yasiel Puig. Whoever it is, some of those guys are from Cuba, of course. But the kids from international, some pan out, some don't. The Phillies have a guy, Jalen Ortiz, who they paid a lot of money for, who certainly didn't really turn into anything over the course of the year. But then you get Carlos Ruiz, who you paid $8,000 for, ends up being a stalwart behind the dish for you through basically the best years of your organization. So with the age of these kids, you just have no idea. But the Cubbies didn't pay him the money, so they're basically getting a free lottery ticket when it comes to these guys. The other gentleman who is in that boat is Reginald Preciado, I believe is how you pronounce it. He was signed in 2019 as well for $1.3 million, I believe, out of the country of Panama, which was a record for a prospect out of Panama at the time. But he is also 16 years old and has not played in any minor league level in major league organizations moving forward. So 3 guys there, Owen Casey, Ishmael Mena, and Reginald Preciado, all 18 years old or younger, have never had any experience professionally, but that certainly doesn't mean that they're going to fail. It just means that the outlook positively is a bit more of a stretch than having actual statistics and kind of on-the-field stuff to go off of. But the last guy they got is Yeson Santana, another shortstop. People say he could potentially be the best prospect they're getting back. 20 years old, fantastic defensively, and that certainly makes sense from San Diego's perspective, giving up some shortstops because, you know, in their infield, we'll get into a free agent signing they made here in the fourth segment, but they're pretty much set. Third base Machado, second base Tatis, shortstop Tatis, second base Kim, and then first base Eric Hosmer. All of those guys are signed for the next 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the contract. So their infield is set. Now they're looking to get that starting rotation and add to the rest of the unit here. But in regards to grades for the trade, I mean, the Padres, I got to give them another A-. I mean, you Darvish, you give up a rotational piece in the major league level, of course, but he was going to be a free agent anyway after this year. So, you know, really no harm, no foul there when it comes to what you're looking at. And then 4 lottery tickets is sent to the Cubbies. So, I mean, yes, they sent quite a bit of money from signing purposes to the Cubs, but if you're the Cubs, you're not getting anybody that's going to help you this year outside of Davies and next year or the year after. I mean, these kids are 16, 18, 20 years old, so they're a handful of years away to ultimately making contributions for the Cubs. So, I mean, I got to give the Cubs a C-, D+. I'm a fan of lottery tickets, but when it comes to moving one of the best starters in all of baseball, I don't think you should just get 4 lottery tickets back and a starter that you're ultimately trying to move here. So a fascinating week for the Padres, wrapped up with a free agent signing I'll touch on in segment 4. But basically talking to scouts, in these 2 trades for Snell and Darvish, the Padres only gave up 2 of their top 10 prospects. And man, wouldn't it be nice to have a deep prospect pool to the point where you can add 2 elite starters and only give up 2 top 10 prospects. That is just a well-run organization, a deep organization, and one that should have continued success here over the next couple of years. But we're going to step aside here one last time from the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll pause now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll talk about a few other free agent signings that have taken place, as well as the latest news and notes and what we think we're going to see this week. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Moholic. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Moholic. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you guys haven't done so yet, please hit that rate and review button. Hit that 5 stars, hit that like button, whatever it is out there. Whatever social media, whatever podcast platform, there's tons of them now. GSMC is all over all of them, so if it's rate and review, leave a comment, please do that. If it's like, subscribe, do that. We certainly appreciate it here as we continue to grow as a podcast network as well as a baseball podcast to bringing you guys all the great content for 2021 and giving you guys everything you need to be the most educated and up-to-date fans in Major League Baseball. So the fourth and final segment here, we're going to touch on news, notes, rumors, couple of trades, couple of signings, just, the rest of the bag here in regards to the past week or so on what's taken place. And, of course, the San Diego Padres remain right in the middle of it because they traded for Snell, they traded for Darvish, and they also signed Ha-Seong Kim from the KBO over in Korea. He was the top guy available in that league coming over from the Kiwoom Heroes. If you guys have been listening for quite some time, I've been discussing the KBO here for a couple of months. We talked about it when the MLB was down, and then over the past couple of weeks, we discussed some of the international guys who could be coming over, and Ha-Seong Kim was basically the top offensive guy available from either Japan or Korea. You know, he's only, let's see here, I think 25 years old. In 138 games last year, he hit .306 with a career-high 30 home runs, 24 doubles, 109 RBIs, and he also had 23 stolen bases. He had 75 walks to just 68 strikeouts. Now, everybody, of course, knows the pitching in the KBO is not to the level of Major League Baseball. And for those of you, if this is your first time listening, it'll kind of go KBO, AA, Japan, AAA, and then, of course, Major League Baseball. Now, it's not that cut and dry, but certainly that's an easy way to explain it to you guys who aren't aware of kind of the level of competition over in the KBO. Because amongst all of the KBO, Kim ranked third in runs scored, fifth in stolen bases, sixth in walks, ninth in RBIs, 10th in home runs, 11th in hits, and 12th in average and OPS. So the kid can play. He's only 25 years old. He's had a 7-year career over there in Korea, so he was playing professionally as an 18-year-old, hit .294 for his career, so that .306 average this year isn't much of an outlier when it comes to his career statistics. So I do think Kim will find success here. Do I think he's going to hit 300? No, I don't. But I think anywhere from 250 to 275 would be a solid year from Kim. And if you're getting that type of production from a 25-year-old shortstop / second baseman, I think you're going to be happy if you're the Padres. Because, like I mentioned, you got Machado there at third base, at least for another couple of years. He has an opt-out in the middle of that 10-year contract, but with the way the Padres are kind of aligning the stars, I don't anticipate him wanting to go anywhere, and he will still be paid handsomely. You then have Fernando Tatis Jr. at the shortstop spot, who they are looking to sign long-term. He's early on in his career, arbitration. You then put Kim over at second base for the next 4 years. He signed a 4-year, $28 million deal with the Padres, which with a player and team option, a mutual option for year 5, could make it a 5-year, $39 million deal for Kim. So you have Kim at second base for the next 4 years, and then you have Eric Hosmer at first base, who originally signed an 8-year deal, and I believe off the top of my head, has 4 years remaining on that deal. So San Diego's infield is set. Their rotation is nice at the top. It's just a matter of adding to that bullpen and making sure that offense continues to produce like it should, based on name, and contributions alone here. So Ha-Seong Kim signs with the Padres as they have what may be the best week of any Major League Baseball team in quite some time. So a nice signing for them as well. The other international gentleman who we've spoken about before, Tomoyuki Sugano of the Yomiuri Giants of the Japan Professional Baseball League. Well, reports are, as of Saturday the 2nd, that he is on U.S. soil, and this is to presumably carry out a final decision. He's going to meet with some teams stateside, discuss kind of what's going on, but Morrissey out of Major League Baseball, he reported that the Blue Jays, Padres, Giants, Mets, and Red Sox are teams still interested. Now, of course, I would kind of remove the Padres based on the moves they've made, but the Blue Jays, Giants, Mets, and Red Sox, I believe, are good landing spots for him. So, based on those teams alone, I think he ends up in San Francisco or Boston on a nice deal for them. The Blue Jays we're going to talk about here, or, we can talk about them now. Let's transition over to Toronto because they are involved with all of the top free agents when it comes to the stateside markets. Trevor Bauer had a phone conversation Friday or Saturday night with the Blue Jays. He talked about it on YouTube during one of his vlogs that he's going through in 2020, the offseason. Him and his agent, Rachel Luba, have been very active on social media, kind of keeping everybody up to date on what's going on. But he had a call with Blue Jays pitching coach, the Blue Jays pitching coach, to kind of discuss what was going on there. So it was reported a little bit earlier that Bauer is looking for a deal with an average annual value of $35 to $40 million. And unfortunately, Trevor, I don't know if you're going to get close to that, man. I think that $30 million mark is probably one that you want to shoot for. Garrett Cole recently set the average annual value record for a pitcher at $36 million for the New York Yankees, and Of course, Trevor Bauer is very good, winning a Cy Young last year, but I don't think he's on Garrett Cole and his level when it comes to that next notch of pitchers in the majors. But it is kind of fascinating that Trevor Bauer and Garrett Cole were actually on the same team out there for the UCLA Bruins. So, of course, they had success, but I couldn't even imagine being in the Pac-10 or 12 or whatever it was when they were in school there, facing those guys in college, and now looking at them at the big league level going, man, no wonder we struggled against them over the weekends. But Trevor Bauer, he's talking with the Blue Jays, 5-6 years, 30-some million. So, he's looking at $5 and $150. I think he's going to get, probably $4 and $125, $130, $31 million a year, $32, something like that. But I don't think he hits that $36 that Garrett Cole set this past offseason. But Trevor Bauer isn't the only guy that the Blue Jays are in on. They're also talking with George Springer, who is reportedly down to 2 teams. He will be deciding between the New York Mets and Toronto Blue Jays. He is expected to sign in the month of January, but, not right after the new year here over the next couple of weeks. But, he's going to get a long-term contract over $100 million. I'm sure he's looking for something 5-6 years, $140 million. But at age 30, I don't know if they're going to want to go till that mid-30s because guys tend to start to decline kind of early to mid-30s. So ideally, they're looking at a 4-year pact. I think if either team's willing to go to 6, they would ultimately get George Springer. I don't think either one of them wants to go above and beyond 5. And I think they're looking at $25 to $30 million a year. So that $5 and $150, I think, is a good barometer for George Springer. But, if Bauer goes to the Blue Jays, does that eliminate Springer? I don't think so. I don't think these guys are independent of each other or vice versa. If Springer signs, that eliminates them from the Bauer sweepstakes. I think the Blue Jays are positioned to make a big splash here in free agency and on more than one particular individual, because they've also been rumored to be in the Francisco Lindor sweepstakes to possibly be able to add him before 2021, but we'll have to wait and see. And I think prioritizing Trevor Bauer over George Springer is the move there in Toronto, because you plug Bauer next to Ryu at the top of that rotation. You got a bunch of the kids on the offensive side of things. You add some bullpen pieces and ultimately may be able to compete with the Rays, who have moved on from Snell, the Yankees, who may not bring back LeMahieu, and of course, Boston and Baltimore are both on the bottom of that division and not looking to compete, really this next year in any way. So, continuing around the horn here, what else do we got? Masahiro Tanaka has acknowledged publicly that it's pretty much the New York Yankees or back to Japan for him. Of course, he originally threw for the Tohoku Rakuten Golden Eagles from 2007 to 2013, and he's always stated that he wanted to end his career back in Japan where he started it, kind of putting the cherry on top there. But, the market for Tanaka may not be where he wants it. Depending on looking at some of the other starting pitchers that have gotten deals, you have Drew Smyly, a 1-year deal, Robbie Ray, a 1-year deal, and if Tanaka is looking at 1 year, $8, $9, $10 million, he could probably make something close to that over in Japan, because there were a couple of outfielders who have recently signed to go to Japan, and they're going to make $6, $7 million guaranteed. So Tanaka, the name alone, the marketing, the fanfare that he would bring in, he would certainly be worth $10, $11, $12 million to those clubs over there. So it'll be fascinating to see kind of how this Tanaka thing shapes up here. I do think the Yankees bring him back. They're just letting him kind of define the market out there. And then ultimately, I think they make a move to have him return back to New York, because I don't think they want to lose him to Japan. I know he's not the pitcher he once was, but I do still think he can be very effective here stateside moving forward. Trade that happened. Here we go. December 29th, the Tampa Bay Rays traded pitcher Jose Alvarado to the Philadelphia Phillies in a 3-team deal. The Dodgers received pitcher Garrett Clevinger from Philadelphia, and the Rays received minor league infielder Dylan Paulson from the Dodgers. And The Phillies, of course, making a move to upgrade that bullpen. They had the worst bullpen ERA in pretty much half a century when it comes to Major League Baseball, if not the worst bullpen in the history of baseball. They hadn't made any moves up until this point. They claimed a couple of guys off of waivers, but really not what Philadelphia fans are looking for in regards to an upgrade to compete with the likes of the Mets, Nationals, and Braves for 2021. But Alvarado, a hard-throwing left-handed 26-year-old, certainly somebody you would want to add to the fold. I mean, the guy's 99, 100 miles an hour with some run from the left side. He was very good in 2018. He had 80 strikeouts and only 64 innings, touching 100 miles an hour routinely. But over the past 2 innings, he's dealt with some arm trouble, some family concerns. He's had command issues, and he's thrown 40 innings combined over the last 2 years. So if the Phillies can get Alvarado back to where he was in 2018, that's certainly going to be an upgrade for them in the bullpen. And, watching the highlights of Alvarado and that movement on 99 coming at you, if the Phillies can get him in the zone consistently, there is nobody like that for them on the current roster. I mean, they have a guy from the right side, Connor Brogdon, who's a heavy, hard thrower, mid to high 90s, but for the longest time, the Phillies just didn't have those guys coming out and throwing cheese out of the bullpen. It was almost like, general management and management were allergic to the hard-throwing guys. When every other team seemed to have them, the Phillies guys would just come out 92, 93, and it was extremely frustrating from a fan's perspective. But continuing to talk about the Phillies, there's been rumors that Wilson Contreras could be a plan B if JT Realmuto decides to sign elsewhere. In regards to ROI, when it comes to paying Realmuto or trading for Contreras, the cost could be similar when it comes to talent, because Contreras, he's not going to be paid as nice. And with the prospects they would have to give up, it could even out for that $25-30 million that Realmuto is trying to get moving forward. So MLB Network insider John Heyman reported that right-hander Ross Detweiler agreed to a 1-year deal with the Marlins. 34-year-old right-hander has been a bit of a journeyman here over the past couple of seasons. Rangers, Braves, A's, White Sox. His ERA has been high over that time, but he had success early in his career and was ultimately a high draft pick. So the Marlins trying to get some return there for a cheap guy. The Red Sox, they're staying engaged with Jackie Bradley Jr. He's had some interest from other teams, but Boston continues to make it aware that they would love to have JBJ back in Boston if the price is right. So it could be fascinating ultimately where it ends up. And then lastly here, DJ LeMahieu, still not signed. The Yankees making him a priority. The Blue Jays are in on LeMahieu. A couple of other teams showing some interest from the shadows. Nobody's really sure exactly who or what, the old mystery team, quote unquote, that everybody loves to report about. But the top guys still out there. And not only the top guys. I mean, I saw a statistic, 86% of free agents remain unsigned. And going into 2021 with baseball being over for a couple of months, that's not good for the sport. I mean, the NFL free agency is a spectacle. NBA free agency is a spectacle. Even in the NHL, stuff happens right as the deadline turns. But, here we are months later in baseball, and 86%, almost 9 out of 10 guys, still don't have a job for 2021. So I don't know what the answer is there, whether it's a deadline, a couple of different deadlines, or, a deadline on a certain amount of money for a contract, which makes the players kind of jump at things earlier. But, ultimately in January, having almost 9 out of 10 guys still unsigned is not a lot of fun to talk about in regards to potential 2021 matchups, power rankings, what's going on. So if you guys could kind of pick it up there, sign some people, we could have some great conversations over the next 2 months until spring training starts coming up here in March. But that'll do it for today's episode. That'll wrap things up. I appreciate you guys tuning in once again. Check us out on social media. Rate and review the podcast. Like, subscribe. Check out the other shows within the network. But definitely enjoy yourselves this week. Try to have some fun. New year, new me, of course, with 2021. Whether you're trying to stop smoking, start working out, eat healthy, whatever those standard kind of New Year's resolutions are, I wish you well in your endeavors and hopefully more success as a whole for the human race in 2021 than 2020. But that'll do it for today. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And we're back to our regular schedule now that we're through the holidays. So I'll talk to you guys this Thursday. We'll see you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.